Don't wanna be an American idiot.
Slowly back at it on 700 WLW. Finally warm from my trip. Well, cold up there in western New York. So we have the Michigan school shooter case where the parents are in hiding. They're now arrested, charged for either furnishing or allowing access to a handgun to their 15-year-old kid. And this is interesting. Obviously, a lot of layers of the story, but also there's a local element to this in just a second. And that is that a Cincinnati public school teacher is accused of allowing drugs in her home in Deer Park. And the drugs belong to her adopted son, who's 19 years old. Prosecutors say that they searched the home in early November after a long, lengthy, multi-jurisdictional investigation and showed that he had heroin and cocaine and with the intent to traffic that one. But they're now charging the mom. And so the question is whether it's the Michigan school shooter case or this case here locally, what kind of liability do you have if your kid does something that rises to criminal nature? In the case of the Michigan school shooter, sure, that's an atrocity, right? That's murder. In this case, it's dealing drugs. As a parent, how responsible are you asked to be under the eyes of the law when it comes to the dealings of in this case, a teenager? You know, certainly at 15, you're emancipated at 19, but at 15, you're still a kid, right? But at the same time, it's that awkward stage, awkward years where you're trying to give them a little bit of space and wings. Not making excuses here, but it's certainly going to be an interesting test of the Constitution. Joining me on the show is attorney Jason Phillabaum on 700 WLW. Jason, good morning. How's everything?
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. So Norwood police led this investigation. The Hamilton County prosecutor under Joe Dieters got involved and said, well, she just seems like she's a nice lady, a nice teacher who adopted this 19-year-old and had an idea that this was happening under her roof. So when you look at this, you look at the Michigan case. Take me through what the law says about responsibilities of parents.
Well, generally speaking, a parent cannot be held liable for criminal conduct of the child, criminally liable. So if your child goes out and commits a crime, then theoretically the general principle is that the parents cannot be criminally responsible unless they aided and abetted or something of that nature. Mm-hmm. Parents can be civilly liable for actions of the child, and that's a little different subject. But so parents can be civilly liable, but not criminally liable. Now, what makes these cases different, and we'll talk about the one in Michigan first, is that they are essentially alleged to be complicit. For example, you can't buy a gun for anyone. If you're going to buy a gun, it's got to be for yourself. You can't buy it for anyone as a gift. Mm-hmm. You also cannot buy it for a child for two reasons. One is a child can't possess a firearm. And two, again, you can't even buy a gun for anyone else, even if they're legally able to possess it. So in the Michigan case, what they're charged with is, number one, they bought a gun on Black Friday, the father did, and the son immediately put on social media that his dad bought him his early Christmas present. And then mother, I guess, posted a picture of them going to the range saying, hey, he's trying out his new firearm for Christmas.
Toy.
So
I think she called it a toy, right?
Right, and that's
Scary.
why I think number one, they're a little bit of an issue. Number two is the shooter was looking at ammunition on his phone in school, and a teacher saw it, sent him to the principal's office, and then there's a text from the mother that says something to the extent of, "Hey, I'm not mad at you, just don't get caught next time." Well, children are not allowed to purchase ammunition either. And so you have a mother almost condoning an illegal activity. And then the third thing is they were actually given I guess, drawings of this son wanting or talking about not being able to stop wanting to shoot someone. Yeah. And they took no action whatsoever. So based on those three things, the prosecutor said, I'm going to charge the parents. I'm going to charge them essentially with complicity and aiding and abetting and things of that nature. Now, ultimately, I'm not sure that they have a strong case up there for complicity to voluntary homicide or involuntary homicide or whatever they're calling it in Michigan. I don't think ultimately they'll have the state will have a good case, but they're coming down hard on it because I think public opinion.
Well, Jason, in this case too, we'll get back to the local and with the drugs, but it's interesting to me because had this been a long gun or a rifle, would that I don't know Michigan law says specifically, but we saw this with Kyle Rittenhouse, right? It's like it was a long gun. Generally you don't hunt with an AR, but you could have a long gun at 17 because it falls into the hunting category. This was a handgun, so it doesn't fall under hunting. Is the difference in this thing between these people being locked up or going free, or at least going to trial, the fact that one is a long gun and one is a pistol?
Probably not, because what's very interesting is there's almost like a loophole or conundrum in our system right now where, like, for example, if my son were 17 years old, he could possess a long gun for hunting, but he can't purchase it. He's underage. So I essentially would have to purchase it for him, but I'm not allowed to purchase a gun for someone else. I can only purchase a gun for myself. So, in other words, the son might not be charged if he's in possession of a long rifle for something other than hunting, but the person who gave it to him could be. And so there's a little bit of a conundrum there, and I think that's what they're really hanging their hat on in Michigan is it was kind of open. They bought this gun for their son as a toy, and that is just absolutely unacceptable under the law.
Yeah, and I look at it and go, but there are products out there, and not only for handguns, but specifically for long guns. I mean, there's kids' model rifles, hunting rifles, because that's a family tradition. You go out hunting. I'm buying the gun. Obviously, it's not for me because it's a kid's rifle, but legally, I can't give it to my kid because they're not allowed to possess it. How does that work? If I'm a hunter and I buy my kid a rifle because we hunt, how do we get above the law there, or how do we get right with the law with that? Based on what you're telling me,
essentially, the parent buys the gun for himself. The parent buys the gun for himself and then takes his son out shooting and lets his son or his daughter be the one that uses that gun at hunting or target shooting or something like that. It's essentially almost like what a lot of people do with cars. I mean, technically, a teenager can buy a car, but a lot of times parents will buy a car, it's in their name, and then let their child use it appropriately. And so theoretically, when you're buying a hunting rifle, you should buy it for yourself and then allow your son. And again, each state is different. So I'm just talking about certain states right now because even in some of the there's still a few states where that would be inappropriate for them to have a hunting rifle at all. So
you could buy it, but you have to basically keep it locked up and away from them.
Yeah, it's your gun. Right. It's not your child's gun. It's not available for their unfettered use. And when parents start letting their children just have unfettered access to firearms, then that's a problem. And if they know that it's like I keep my guns locked up. If somehow someone broke into my safe and took my gun, I don't think I'd be responsible for that. But if I leave the gun out and say, hey, if someone comes into our house, you use this one, this child uses this one, this child uses that one, that's a problem because now you're essentially leaving guns for children to use, and that's not appropriate at all.
What would happen, Jason Phillabaum, if you have a legitimate fear of, home invasion or there's a crime wave in your neighborhood? But again, that's perception. You can look at crime maps and go, oh, it's not really that, it's not that dangerous. But there's a lot of people that go, God, we just had another road rage shooting yesterday. It's overnight, as a matter of fact. People get scared. It's like, hey, listen, I'm not going to keep it in a safe because I may need it at any time. Or you may have shown your kids, in this case, with the kid in Michigan, that, hey, listen, here's a gun, here's how you use the whole thing. If indeed you need to save someone's life, protect your life, here's an opportunity for you to do that. What if something like that happened? This is different. He took it to school and all bets are off there. I get that. But, what about people who need it for protection?
Well, I think, again, gun laws are very, very specific, but I don't think leaving a gun out by itself is illegal. But you've got to look at all kinds of situations. Like, for example, I think leaving a firearm on a kitchen table when you have a 2-year-old or other children walking around, that's going to rise to the level of criminal activity. Yep. If you keep a firearm in your bedroom and it's specifically for home protection and you've got older children that you've taught and known better, I think there's an argument there that there's nothing illegal about leaving it unlocked. Now, some people will argue that that would open yourself up to civil liability. I think some people would argue that it opens yourself up to negligent criminal conduct if at some point a child gets to it. But at the end of the day, you have the right to possess your firearms, and most people think that there should be some locking devices, but it's going to be a fact-by-fact basis. And again, the gun laws are so specific. That's why, like we talked about in the Rittenhouse case, when you use a firearm, own a firearm, you must be absolutely responsible with it, because every action you do is going to be second-guessed and scrutinized after the fact.
Right. Attorney Jason Phillabaum on the show on 700 WLW talking about the Michigan shooter, now that the parents are in custody, what that entails. But a local story here that is almost cut from the same format here. So we have a teacher in Cincinnati Public Schools, 36 years old. She has a 19-year-old adopted son. Apparently the son had possession of heroin or cocaine in amounts that they considered trafficking. They're now charging the mom in this case. What do we know about this?
Well, permitting drug abuse essentially is allowing someone to commit drug offenses on your property, whether it's a car or a house. Okay. There's different sections of the statute for a car and different sections for a house. But if you, using the house as an example, if you let your child traffic drugs out of your house, then you are permitting drug abuse. If you allow your spouse even to traffic drugs in your house or in your leased vehicle or owned vehicle, then you're opening yourself up to permitting drug abuse. If, Scott, you call me up and say, hey, can I borrow your car? I got this big drug deal and everyone knows my car, and I'm like, sure, take mine. I've just committed permitting drug abuse, even though I'm not in the car at the time. So that's essentially what she's charged with. She's charged with letting her son, whether it's adopted or a neighbor or a friend or whoever's living in the house, is irrelevant. She's charged with letting someone else use her house as a basically drug trafficking house. Now, what I've read in the paper, her defense counsel has argued, is that she didn't know about it. And, if your child is trafficking drugs out of your house and you do not know about it, and you can't be held liable for it. But if you walk in and there's drugs all over the counter and you're just turning a blind eye, then yes, you can be charged with permitting drug abuse.
Okay, but in this case, and Scott Croswell, who's her defense, really, really good, strong attorney, obviously, he said that, well, the grand jury's going to hear the case on Friday, and it's just a case where she's a nice person trying to do the right thing, adopted this 19-year-old when he lost his family. She had no idea that any drug transactions were happening, would never allow that, and when they raided the place, the only drugs they found in the home were in his coat pocket in his own closet. Does that weaken their case?
Well, it depends, because according to the search warrant, I believe it said that drugs were seen in plain view. Now, it's possible that police officers were, during investigation, saw the drugs in plain view at other times, because they did say this was a long investigation. However, they're going to have to prove that if drugs were in plain view at a certain period of time, she was in the house at the time and should have known about it. And, there's two levels to permitting drug abuse. There's felony and there's misdemeanor. Right. And since he is charged with felony trafficking, then she's charged with felony permitting. But it is also possible that the grand jury is going to kick this out as a misdemeanor permitting drug abuse, which is a little bit of a legal fiction. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to prove that she knew it. Mm-hmm. And if it's in his pocket, in his room, and she doesn't regularly go in his room, I think that she's got a very strong case to defend against the permitting.
Yeah, that's sad, too, because, if you're a 19-year-old person, you're very, very close to being an adult, and the last thing, you want is your mom, even your stepmom, your adopted mom, to be snooping around in your stuff. Now, if it's out there laying, there's piles of cocaine all over it, looks like it's Scarface, that's a different story.
Right. And so what I'm starting to see a little bit in society, and I'm starting to see society asking for other people to be held responsible. At the end of the day,
overall, Jason, this is what scares me. Is like, okay, the Michigan school shooter, it's not defending, saying, well, he had every right to have that gun. Of course not. Or in this case, it's like, okay, well, how responsible do we want parents to be for the actions of others? Because if we're going to go down this road, I can look at all the gun violence in Cincinnati that's going on, where kids are out there running the streets in the middle of the night, same age or younger. Should we be holding their parents or their guardians responsible for their actions when they're outside the house, knowing, hey, they have a gun on them and they're out there committing crimes and, jacking people up or committing God knows what, road rage, whatever it is. That's a huge problem in Cincinnati with the murder rate and the shootings, right? It's like, should we hold those parents responsible then? Because it's got to cut both ways.
Right. And I think, my personal opinion is at the end of the day, I think you need to hold the person committing the crime responsible.
Yes.
But ultimately, you have to look and see, is there other factors going around? What really happened here? So, for example, your kid, sneaks a beer, gets in a car, and goes and gets pulled over for OVI. You shouldn't be charged with complicity. But if you're giving your son a bunch of marijuana or alcohol, and then right afterwards you see him get in a car and drive away, at that point, someone's going to be screaming for liability against the parent.
Yep.
So it is pretty factual, but I think generally speaking, the rule of law is parents are not going to be held responsible for criminal action of their children. But if they know their child's committing a crime, they're opening themselves up to their own criminal liability.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a school in America, and I'm talking a high school here, where there isn't some kid who's selling weed or something, right? That was going on when I was a kid, when you were a kid, Jason, anyone listening. And so if that's happening, and maybe it's harder stuff, coke, meth, I don't know. But if that's going on, and you're the parent, I guess there's parents who just willfully are blind to their kids' actions, which we see a lot these days, especially in sports, kids' sports. Look at how parents act in defending their kids at all costs. And
right.
That's true throughout society, right? And that's one thing that the rich and poor have in common is there's parents out there that their kids can do no wrong. This is part of it.
Right. And I get it. Society wants strong parents. You can't be defending your parent or your kids on everything. If they do wrong, you need to take care of business at home. That's what raising, children is all about. But, and that's why there's civil laws too. So for example, if my son drives off in my car and crashes, I could be potentially civilly liable. And there is, I think, our society has accepted that. But if he drives off against my knowledge and he's using drugs, then that's not a criminal offense on the parent. But again, if I'm allowing it to happen and I'm helping fuel that a crime, like the Michigan parents are alleged to do, then yes, I think you're going to start to see society come after them and charge them. And under the right set of facts and circumstances, the parent's going to be convicted.
Yeah. Jason Phillabaum, what do you think happens in these cases?
Well, I think the Michigan case, because they're facing such heavy penalties, they're looking at life. My guess is there's going to be a plea bargain. But I'm not quite sure that they would ultimately be convicted of the involuntary manslaughter, because their crime was about the gun, not about the shooting. And so I think they're probably overcharged. The one here in Cincinnati, unless they've got rock solid proof that this teacher saw the drugs in plain view and knew trafficking was happening, my guess is the case will be dismissed at grand jury or dismissed at trial.
I think, too, in the Michigan cases, we get more information about this, that if it looks like that there were some serious mental issues that were undiagnosed, untreated, or ignored, or social things like that the parents kind of knew about, that their kid was going through some mental crisis at that point and introduces a gun into the situation. I think that'll really be a turning point for this case. Would you agree?
Right. I think there's a lot of facts that need to be developed up there before anyone jumps to a conclusion. But when I saw it and saw them charged and started reading about it, my reaction was, I see why they're charged, but I'm thinking that's probably an overcharge.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate it. Jason Phillabaum, attorney at law locally here and always on the Scott Sloan Show, contributing with stuff like this. Always appreciate it, Jason. Thanks, man.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care. There you go. Phillabaum's the best. He's your guy right there. Let me do this. I'm going to get a timeout. I want to get some calls on this at 513-749-7000, 800 the big one, pound 700 AT&T. When the Michigan story broke, I thought, okay, it seems pretty clear. The parents bought the gun, let him bring the gun, carry the gun, he has access to 50-year-old has access to a gun. That's a handgun at that. That's pretty telling. And then you add the element of, there's some warning signs there that were ignored. But, you could go back and blame the school, too, which a lot of people are doing. On the drug case locally here, a 19-year-old young man, adopted mom, she had no idea, according to her attorney, that he was dealing drugs. She had no idea. 36-year-old teacher had no idea the 19-year-old was doing the stuff. When they raided the place, they only found drugs in his closet, in his coat. There weren't piles of drugs laying around. I think that kind of weakens the case a little bit, but a grand jury is going to decide if there's enough evidence to move forward. The bigger question for me and you as parents is, how far should we go in charging us, the parents, when it comes to the actions of our kids? 513-749-7000. Quick timeout. More ahead. Sloaney 700 W.